Hi, I'm just going to read now from the psychology book, chapter 17. Away from camera view, I'll read bits at a time. I'll start today with as much as I'm comfortable with. Social psychology. Imagine that you have volunteered to participate in a study in which you and several other students will discuss personal problems caused by the pressures of university life. You are told to avoid embarrassment, you and 5 other participants, or perhaps 2 or 1, depending on which group you are placed in, will not see one another. Instead, you will sit in individual cubicles and talk over an intercom system. Participants' microphones will be activated only when it is their turn to speak. And to preserve anonymity, the experimenters will not listen. The experiment begins. The first voice you hear is that of a young man. Haltingly, he explains that he is having a great deal of difficulty adjusting to the pressures he is experiencing. He also states with obvious embarrassment that he is prone to epileptic-like seizures when he is under stress. You and the other participants talk in turn about your reactions to stress. After a very short time, it is apparent that he is in trouble. Excuse me, he seems to fumble for words. Then he begins choking and pleading for help. He is clearly experiencing a seizure. What do you do? We have just described an experiment conducted by 2 social psychologists, John Darley and Bill Latane, 1968. In the actual experimental design, the researchers had pre-recorded all participants' voices so that only one subject actually took part in each group discussion, and that subject's reactions were the focus of the study. The results might surprise you. When it says subjects, but I want to say people because they're people. When people thought that they were the only ones aware of the emergency, Darley and Latane found that 85% offer help. In contrast, only 62% offer help when they thought they were 2 other bystanders, compared to a mere 31% of subjects who thought there were 5 others in the group. Social psychologists use the term diffusion of responsibility to explain Darley and Latane's findings. Our own sense of responsibility is diminished by the presence of other bystanders because we assume that they have as much responsibility to act as we have. We're less likely to intervene to give aid. Diffusion of responsibility helps to explain some other disturbing incidents. One is a violent report that I will not read. I will skip the reading of the act of aggression simply to pick up on the terminology acquired is bystander apathy. So yeah, two aggressive incidents are narrated here in the text that I'm skipping, simply to say that things happened during the day that crowds did nothing to help. They did not intervene because of um, diffusion of responsibility, we observe what is called bystander apathy. Um, those incidents, I'll just skip to the last paragraph. Such incidents illustrate an important fact that we have not yet fully explored in this text. Our actions are greatly influenced by social processes and our perception of our social environments. Social psychology is the field of psychology concerned with how social influences our behavior. Also asks a number of questions that we attempt to answer in this chapter. How, for instance, do we form impressions of people? How do these impressions influence our behavior? How important is physical attractiveness in selecting a potential mate? How likely are we to resist pressures to change our behavior so that they conform with those of other people, even when we disagree with their actions or their opinions? Is aggressive behavior inevitable for humans and other animals? What factors contribute to aggressive behavior? The scope of social psychology is far too broad to cover comprehensively in one chapter. Instead, taking an approach that touches on many topics with little depth, we have limited the discussion to the broadly researched areas of social perceptions, social attribution, attitudes, prejudice, social influence, interpersonal attraction, and aggression. We begin with social perception. Social perception. We encounter many people each day, from the clerk at the food store, to the classmates sitting behind us, to the mechanic servicing our car. Excuse me. Even if our interactions with these people are brief, we form impressions or perceptions about them. The term social perception describes the ways we perceive, evaluate, categorize, and forms judgments about the qualities of people we encounter. These social perceptions have a critical influence on our interactions. In fact, they are more important in guiding our behaviors than the attitudes and behaviors of the people around us. Thus, the people in Darley and Lataine's diffusion of responsibility experiment did not intervene because they perceived that others would probably seek help, not because they observed others helping. Likewise, you may withdraw from a friend because you perceive that he's annoyed with you. Whether he actually is annoyed is not as significant in determining your response as your own perceptions. Since these readings of other people are important, it's worthwhile knowing how we form them. 3 factors influence our social perceptions: their first impressions, schemas, and implicit personality theories. First impressions. First impressions are the initial judgments we make about people. They play an important role in our social perceptions. We're more likely to form opinions on others quickly based on first impressions and to refrain from forming opinions until we have more information. These first impressions may change as we get to know a person better, but we often tend to hang on to them even in the face of contradictory evidence. Thus, initial opinions may have a strong impact on our future interactions with people. For example, if you first greet a new tenant in your apartment building at a party where he behaves in a loud, egotistical manner, it will probably be hard for you to perceive him as a sensitive, caring person if you later see him comforting a child um, who has scraped his knee. The first information we receive about a person often seems to count the most, a phenomenon referred to as the primacy effect. The primacy effect was demonstrated in an experiment in which 2 lists of traits the resembling person were read to two separate groups of people. In one group of people, they heard a description about the person that began with positive characteristics such as intelligent, industrious, followed by negative ones such as impulsive, stubborn. Their overall assessments of that person were positive. People in the other group heard the same list and characteristics except in reverse order. The results of the assessment that those people gave were far more negative. So, research indicates negative impressions are quickly formed, hard to overcome. In contrast, opposites tend to be true about positive first impressions. Those are hard to earn and they're easily lost. For example, your reticence to conclude that your new dating companion is reliable may subside only after several encounters in which he or she exhibits that trait. However, one incident of unreliable behavior may cause you to quickly revise your social perception of the person. In contrast, if your companion is a few minutes late for your first date, you may quickly decide that, oh, he or she is flaky, unreliable, a characterization that may change only after numerous encounters in which your partner exhibits the trait of reliability. Excuse me. Person schemas. What determines whether our first impression of a person is positive or negative? For instance, are you drawn to the person shown in figure 17.1, or is your impression less favorable? Your answer will depend, and to a large extent, on the schema that you have developed. Recall from Chapter A that schemas are the conceptual frameworks we use to make sense of our world. Schemas are the conceptual frameworks we use to make sense of our world. The concept of schemas explains how we perceive the people we greet. For example, you might have schemas of lawyers as aggressive, verbal, of professors as studious, somewhat distracted. Social psychologists refer to these generalized assumptions about certain classes of people as person schemas. Person schemas provide a structure for evaluating the people we greet, allowing us to take shortcuts by concentrating on some facts, ignoring others. When we assess a person for the first time, we tend to pick up only the information that fits our existing schemas, ignoring the rest. That process is efficient, yet unfortunately not always the most accurate way in forming first impressions. You may have experienced instances where first impressions were quite inaccurate. Once we fit a person into a schema, we tend to use that schema as the general organizing principle for interpreting further information about the person. For example, if our first impression of the new neighbor is that he's unfriendly, we're likely to evaluate her failure to comment on our shiny new car as further evidence of unfriendliness. If she then acts in a way that does not fit the schema, for example, picking up her garbage after the garbage has been scattered by the wind, we may dismiss that act, like concluding that she picked up the mess only because she was worried that would blow into her own lawn. Implicit personality theories. Just as the person schemas guide us in fitting people into pre-existing categories, we also make implicit assumptions about personality traits that usually go together. For instance, if we greet a person whom we perceive as intelligent, we may expect that person also to be skillful and imaginative. Those assumptions about how traits are related to each other and people's personalities are called implicit personality theories. We may not be aware of many of our implicit assumptions. However, since these assumptions may be firmly rooted, they're likely to be activated when we greet people for the first time. In one study, researchers plotted graphically clusters of associations among 60 characteristic traits. This is the chart. They have four main characteristics: good intellectual, good social, bad intellectual, bad social. Our implicit personality theories are often categorized around central traits, traits that we tend to associate with many other characteristics. For example, many people associate the trait of coldness with unsociability, humorlessness, and lack of popularity. Even a single central trait that may play an important role in organizing our implicit personality theories about others. In an early study, in 1946, there were two groups of people with a list of 7 traits describing a hypothetical person. The list of each group differed only with one central trait: warm versus cold. Yet, that difference influenced significantly the people's predictions about other traits from the hypothetical person. So the people who had been provided a trait list that included warm were more likely to predict that the hypothetical person was generous or had a good sense of humor than the people whose list contained the word cold. Psychologists use the term halo effect to describe our tendency to infer other positive or negative traits from our perception of one central trait. The halo effect was demonstrated in a study that involved subjects observing 2 versions of an interview with a Belgian professor, in which he appeared to be either likable or unlikable. Not only did people prefer the likable person in the interview, they also responded more positively to seemingly unrelated qualities such as his accent, his physical appearance. Attribution theories. An important part of social perceptions are the judgments we make about why people behave as they do. Our responses to other people are strongly influenced by these attributions. We're constantly attempting to understand the reasons for other people's behavior. Attributions allow us to make sense out of other people's actions, figure out their attitudes and personality traits, and ultimately gain some control over subsequent interactions with them through our increased ability to predict their behavior. According to attribution theory, we tend to attribute people's behavior either to dispositional causes, such as motivational states or personality traits, or to situational causes, such as environmental or external factors. This distinction could have important effects on our relationships with people. For example, suppose you have recently begun dating someone that you like very much. The two of you spend a weekend visiting your date's parents. Much to your dismay, your friend acts like a different person, restrained, impersonal, physically unresponsive. What has caused the change? If you attribute that to external factors, that your date is ill at ease around his or her parents, you're unlikely to feel that the relationship is seriously threatened. However, If you attribute the change to an internal cause, that your partner no longer feels responsive to you, excuse me, you may seriously reevaluate the relationship. Clearly, our attributions of the causes of people's behaviors have an important impact on our relationships. How do we make these attributions? Two theories that attempt to explain this process are the correspondent interference theory and the covariant principle. The correspondent inference theory attempts to explain the attributions we make about people's behaviors by looking at the conditions under which we make those attributions. Theorist Edward E. Jones and his colleagues use the term correspondent inference to describe cases in which we attribute a person's behavior to an underlying disposition. For instance, in the early example of the new neighbor who behaved recklessly at a party, we may have inferred that the person had a loud and unpleasant disposition. However, we do not always make dispositional attributions based on the behaviors we observe. If you watch a television game, If you watch a television game show MC behaving in a solicitous and charming manner to guest participants, you are unlikely to infer that the host is genuinely warm and caring. Why do we make correspondent inferences about people's dispositions in some cases, not in others? Jones, with his associates, suggests several factors. One important variable is the social desirability, or expectedness, of behaviors we observe. Some common behaviors are so socially acceptable that they reveal virtually nothing about a person. For example, we expect politicians running for office to smile, shake hands with strangers. That expected behavior fits in nicely with our schema of a politician. Doesn't tell us very much about the politician's disposition. True, the candidate might actually be a warm, friendly person. It's equally possible that the smiles, handshakes, the baby kissing are due instead to the influence of social norms. Thus, we're unlikely to draw correspondent inferences about the politician. Attributions and socially undesirable behavior. Do socially undesirable actions have the same impact on our attribution process as socially acceptable behaviors? For instance, if you observe a tennis pro slam his racket on the court after a bad call, are you more likely to make a correspondent inference about his or her disposition than if you observed polite and controlled behavior? If so, could you explain why unacceptable behavior would be more telling than desirable behavior? Consider this question before reading on. In other words, he's asking, why is negative behavior an attribute that draws our attention more than a positive behavior? Several experiments have demonstrated that we are more likely to make correspondent interferences. Not interferences. Several experiments have demonstrated that we are more likely to make correspondent inferences from socially acceptable behavior than from deviant. For example, in one study, subjects listened to various versions of tapes of a man being interviewed for a job, in which the interviewer opened the interaction by specifying the personality traits required for the job, traits such independence, self-reliance. In one version, the applicant described himself in a way that closely matched the desired attributes, while another version, he described his traits as entirely different from those the interviewer was seeking. Most people indicated they were able to make confident judgments about the applicant's true character only when he had described himself as being the opposite of what the job demanded. Such findings are consistent with the correspondent inference theory. Apparently, when a person's behavior fits external social expectations, we tend to discount that as a clue to a person's true nature. The unexpected behavior that deviates from social desirability forms is what influences us to attribute actions to internal dispositions. A second variable that determines whether we make correspondent inferences about a person's disposition is the degree to which his or her behavior is focused on achieving a unique outcome or non common effects that would be unlikely to occur as a result of some other behavior. For example, suppose a friend of yours, a physics major, signs up for a course in quantum mechanics. Will you be unimpressed, or will you imagine of your friend change? Will your image of your friend change? If you find out that the course is required for a degree in physics, you are likely to attribute your friend's action to external causes, since that accomplishes the unique or non-common outcome of obtaining a degree, a goal that could not have been achieved in any other way. If, on the other hand, you discover the course is an obscure offering that is neither required nor recommended for his physics major, you're more likely to make a dispositional attribution about your friend's great intellectual curiosity. A third variable that influences correspondent inferences is whether or not you perceive a person's behavior in a particular manner as resulting from free choice. If we know that a person freely chose to do what the person did, we probably assume that the actions reflect an underlying disposition. So, something from within them, not an external influence. On the other hand, if the person was pressed by situational forces, we are inclined to attribute the behavior to external causes. For example, if one of your friends told you that while you were lunching together, that she strongly supported a conservative political group, you would probably be more inclined to attribute a conservative political attitude to her than if she were to make the same comments during a dinner hosted by a politically conservative dean at your college. Covariation principle, a second theory of how people make attributions, builds on the notion that when we try to figure out why the causes and effects of particular events, we generally begin with the premise that cause and effect go together. Thus, if a cause is altered, the effect will also be changed so that the causes and the effects could be said to covary. According to Howard Kelly, when we make attributions about people's behavior, we tend to look at three potential causes: the situation or context in which the behaviors occur, the persons involved, and the stimuli or objects toward which the behavior is directed. Kelly's theory is known as the covariation principle. Consider the following illustration of the covariation principle. Suppose you enroll in an art appreciation class. On your first visit to the gallery, you observe one member of the class, an intense-looking young man. lingering at each oil painting, staring with apparent rapture. Observing that behavior, you might wonder about that person. Your attribution of causes for that young man's behavior depends on factors inherent in the situation or context in which the behavior occurred. The persons involved, the stimuli or objects toward which the observed behavior is directed. Kelly suggests, as we seek additional information to aid our interpretation of the causes of the person's behavior, we act like social scientists, carefully analyzing the data, paying particular attention to variations in situations, persons, and stimuli on each of the three following separate dimensions. Number 1, distinctiveness. The degree to which other stimuli are capable of eliciting the same behavior from the young man. Does he behave in the same way at other art galleries or museums that your class visits? Or does the behavior occur only at that art gallery? If the behavior occurs only at that gallery, that is highly distinctive. We tend to attribute highly distinctive actions to situational causes. Number 2, consistency. The degree to which the young man exhibits the same behavior and responds to the same stimuli on other occasions. There is high consistency if the person behaves in essentially the same way on other visits to his art gallery. Consistency is important for both dispositional and situational attribution. Number 3, consensus. The degree to which other people exhibit the same response to the stimulus as the actor. If other people react to the art in the gallery in the same or similar fashion, there is high consensus. We tend to attribute low consensus responses to dispositional causes. According to Kelly, we take in information about all these dimensions and use that to determine whether the behavior we have observed is caused by an internal disposition or by the situation. Thus, you might create the following checklists concerning the young man. Distinctiveness, low. The young man behaves the same way at other galleries. Consistency, high. When you return to the same gallery on other occasions, the young man still displays high interest. Consensus, low. Other visitors do not show the same remarkable interest. Based on that assessment, you will probably attribute the young man's behavior to the disposition of a genuine interest in art. Had you noted a pattern of high consistency, high consensus, high distinctiveness, you would probably have attributed the young man's behavior to a situational cause, such as curiosity about the particular artist displayed at the first gallery. I gotta pause because I'm very tired now. There are more pages I could read later to read all this chapter. That is all one chapter. Oh, that is the last chapter in this book, actually. The tiny bit introductory to social psychology for those in search of. This was a broad course I took when I was 14 years old because there's an introduction for those that were looking to narrow in their interests. This textbook has all those topics. So yeah, feeling a bit socially distraught, to say the least. And I decided that I could attempt reading chapter 17. That being the topic I didn't realize was the last chapter in the book. Left off here at page 668.